Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2015, number 2000.100. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Beale. All those in favor? Thank you. Now I need a mover and a seconder for an adjournment. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Powell. All those in favor? The public hearing is now adjourned. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 20th regular meeting of Council. First up is the adoption of the minutes. First item is the minutes of the Council meeting held April 8th, 2015. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Powell. Any omissions, deletions? Councillor Salter.
Yeah, and so on page 9, it indicates that that I made 2 motions, but in fact I didn't. I just made 1 motion that was defeated.
Yeah, that probably. Oh. Sorry, which one was it?
On page 9, and then A, 15101 and 15102, but it was really just 101. It was all 1 motion, which was, yeah, and it was defeated. It was yeah.
So we can change that to be all one.
To just 1 motion.
All
yeah.
1 motion, sure.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, additions, deletions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That's carried. I now need a mover and a seconder for the Committee of the Whole budget deliberation held April the 13th, 2015. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Beale. Any additions, deletions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. And finally, I won't forget this evening, as I did the last time, I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation to approve the agenda. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Oates. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. We have 3 delegations this evening. And the first delegation is no stranger to us and to this room. I guess you feel like you're sitting on the wrong side of the table tonight after all those years. We have Chris Berger and Mr. Dave Whitty. Dave, what's your proper title? Provost. So it sounds military, doesn't it? So I'm going to invite you to come up. Mr. Berger is very familiar with the procedure and how things work, so I'll ask you to both come up and make your presentation, and you have 10 minutes.
I've
Yes.
got the clock on.
Just want to remind you, Mr. Berger, you're being timed.
All right, I'll be seated here momentarily, Your Worship, but thank you very much for the opportunity to present to yourselves and Council. It's wonderful to see everybody here. Do miss the room. To my right, I do have Dr. David Whitty. He is Provost and Vice President Academic for Vancouver Island University. And as Council may recall, we formed a special partnership with Vancouver Island University with respect to preserving our Biosphere designation here. And Dr. Whitty is going to give you a brief summation of some of the activities to date, and then we will have some, hopefully, time for questions. We'll keep it brief. Look how brief I'm being. It's good.
Thanks. It is a pleasure to be here, and Chris handed out earlier our annual report, which I'll touch on in a moment. And so if I'd like to go quickly through the presentation and provide a bit of an overview. There is that wonderful Mount Arrowsmith itself, general area, and then the Biosphere Reserve and its boundaries. One of the interesting things about Mount Arrowsmith is it literally goes from the mountain through into the ocean, which is quite unique in biospheres in the world. As a UNESCO designated site, there are particular mandate requirements, and as you can see, in this instance, it is to ensure environmental, economic, and social sustainability is managed. And I apologize, I do have a cold here tonight, so bear with me. The development and coordination of a worldwide network of places acting as demonstration areas and learning sites with the aim of maintaining and developing ecological and cultural diversity and securing ecosystem services pardon me, for human well-being. So these are standard UNESCO designation requirements. And then lastly, certainly knowledge, including science, to advance our understanding of interactions between people and the rest of nature, and it's really that aspect of the biosphere that we look to here. And then lastly, pardon me, building global capacity for management of complex social ecological systems, particularly through encouraging greater dialogue at the science policy interface, environmental education, and multimedia outreach to the wider community. So biosphere reserves have three key aspects to them. They tend to be areas with significant human and environment relationships. They also promote best practices in achieving sustainable development. And then lastly, they conserve biodiversity in significant ecological areas around the world. One of the things that we see here that is quite unique is this governance model where we see collaboration amongst a variety of stakeholders. In this instance, beginning with VIU and then the City of Parksville, working with First Nations, broader community, the regional district, and other stakeholders. There's three complementary functions that biosphere reserves fulfill, contributing to conservation of biodiversity, fostering sustainable development, and then lastly, providing logistic support for research, monitoring, education, and information exchange. And there it is. So the handout that we provided, which is our 2014 annual report, and certainly I'd suggest if you go through and take a look at it, it talks about the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Reserve Institute that we've created at VIU. It speaks to some of the projects that we've undertaken and plan to undertake this coming year. Describes the new website that we've developed, and on page 11 you'll see many of the people that have been involved and assisted in our work over the last year. Maybe leave it at that, Chris, and you can add in.
How are we doing, Ms. Weeks, for time? A minute or two? Notice how I went to Ms. Weeks. Your Worship, I will conclude just by saying that one of the areas that we have focused on, as you well know from our meetings with our neighbors at the Nanu's First Nation and also the Qualicum First Nation, is in this sphere of our new relationships with our Aboriginal First Nations here. Something very special has happened on Vancouver Island. We have 5 new governments that have appeared in the last couple of years, all First Nations that have gone through the treaty process. And as you probably are well aware, there are very extensive and late-stage discussions right now that will affect our neighbors. And this is a time, more so than ever, to really engage with one another and prepare for what is going to be kind of a new way of doing business. And, you know, the biosphere is particularly well suited for that role. As you saw in the points that were made earlier by Dr. Whitty, you know, we are well positioned to work with the city to ensure that we can continue to have those constructive conversations and to do what we can as neighbors to assist them in this tremendous time of transition. And I'll leave it at that, Doctor. And if there are any questions, Your Worship.
Well, thank you very much, and I think that this will be great reading as we go by. Anybody got any questions for the delegation? Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks very much for your presentation. I really appreciate Chris being short, unusual. Anyways, how many biosphere organizations are there around the world, or there's just multitudes of them? 600 altogether?
It's a network of roughly 600 designations, yes, sir.
And they're all got the same bottom line, what they're trying to achieve? So you're talking to one another all the time, 600 groups?
Good question. In the report, you'll see reference to our work now has been focused here principally to really put the biosphere on a solid footing, while we're talking to There's a Canadian network of biosphere reserves. There's 16 biosphere reserves in Canada. We have 2 of them in British Columbia. There's a meeting in Ottawa in June 4th where that group will come together. And there's a presentation that 2 of our people from VIU are going to, it's referenced in the annual report to, it's called Euro Biosphere Reserves. And they're going to Estonia to do a presentation on the work we're doing here along with Clayoquot to talk about the First Nation activity. So we are engaged internationally as well.
Just one more. One question. Are all these driven by universities, or are they driven by cities, or are they driven by just special interest groups? What drives these?
Well, it's a good question, Councillor. There is a combination of different approaches that have been taken. So certainly universities play a key role in many biospheres because of the research nature and the points that we've made earlier. There are examples where even provincial governments have become involved. And as you may recall, we were sort of looking at what kind of a model can we develop here as part of preserving this designation, and you saw that example earlier. So it is a little bit across the board, but very much there's an international interest in work that's being undertaken here in this region. Our 2 biospheres are well known, and certainly with respect to dealing with the change in our Aboriginal culture and in these new governments being formed, there's absolutely eyes all over the globe that are going to be looking into this area to see how we do.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I would just like to congratulate you. I know that the Biosphere hasn't always been a workable organization, and I think that the work that's been done and the partnership with VIU is what it took to get it off the ground and really meaningful. And so as somebody that's been involved with it in the past, I want to say thank you very much, because I think you saved it.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. In February, I got to take part a little bit on the Biosphere Reserve talk that was here in the forum. Is that part of the grant writing where you're able to bring speakers and bring to the community to bring awareness and that? So when you talk about the grant writing, that predominantly helps that? So.
If I may, we have identified a speaker series as one of the products so that we can engage the broader community.
It was really well attended and really well presented, so I just wanted to say that as well. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Salt.
Well, it's not a question, actually. I just wanted to speak to something that Councillor Greer had asked, which was what drives the Biosphere Reserves. Actually, it's driven by Agenda 21, and it's actually located in that agenda, which was created in Rio back in 1997 by the United Nations and other groups. And so I think that if Council would consider taking a look at Agenda 21, they would recognize that a lot of the things that are driven through City Council, especially the sustainability issues, have come out of Agenda 21.
Any further questions? No? Thank you. Well, thanks very much for coming, and it's always good to see former Mayor Berger. And I know we'll be seeing more of Dr. Whitty in a few moments. I'm excited about it, obviously, because of the role of the First Nations that are coming into the collaborative effort that we're going to be putting on, and I look forward to their participation. The exciting thing about this particular effort taking off now is that, the aspects of research. One of the questions I've been meaning to ask for some time now, and I've forgotten every time we've had a side meeting. Are there some elements of the biosphere that are at risk or are threatened by whatever, or is it pretty much still very pristine and left alone? Is any information on that?
Well, I think we have to be careful to remember that biospheres aren't necessarily pristine parkland or pristine places, although certainly here in this region we have a very good way about of our lives. But it's really more about those interactions and trying to preserve what you do have and, finding better ways to do things. And certainly it draws a very important bridge, not just with the built environment or the environment in general, but also with the human condition, people here, right? And how can we work better together? Which is why there's been so much focus most recently on some of the emerging new First Nations.
Well, thank you very much. And Dr. Whitty, you're going to stay in place, I gather, and we're going to have the next delegation, which is Dr. Whitty and Dr. Carol Stewart, who's in the audience. So, Dr. Stewart, if you want to move over, Mr. Berger, we're set to go. And the topic is the Center for Health and Aging that we have here on campus at the VIU campus here in the PCTC. So go right ahead. Dr. Whitty, continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship and Council. This item is dear to our heart, and I know yours, and so we're pleased to be here tonight to report on, give you a status update. Before I do that, just a little brief on VIU. Many of you are aware, 18,000 students in terms of faces. We generate $400 million in the region yearly, just almost 3,000 employees. In Oceanside itself, we offer adult basic education, business, health and human services, trades and applied technology, professional development and training, and of course our Elders College. And one of the things that is really important to us is the contribution that volunteers make to VIU here, and particularly in Milner Garden. We have something over 15,000 volunteer hours in Milner itself. So thank you to the community for that. So I'll introduce Dr. Carol Stewart. She's Dean of Health and Human Services, and will be doing the presentation tonight.
Thanks very much, Dave. And thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm very pleased to be here. I was here on Friday evening for the medical office assistant graduation, so a little bit of a different setup in this room with our students celebrating their graduation. We had 9 in the class, 8 of them were here, and 7 of them are already employed. And I think they finished class on Thursday or Friday this week. So, and most of them within this community. So it's really wonderful to have the shared space that this particular center offers us. So I want to talk a little bit tonight about where we're going and kind of how we're going to get there around the Center for Healthy Aging. And starting with what some of the work that's been done to date and why change now. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is, but I'll give you a little bit of a history to start. So in around 2013, the development of the Center for Healthy Aging began. And over the last 2 years, Lynn McFadgen did quite a bit of work in Parksville and in Qualicum to develop relationships, put on some workshop-based programming. She collaborated with the town on some municipality grants, looking at some aging in place, environmental concerns, and doing some research grant type of work. However, over that time period, concerns began to develop regarding the costs and the resources for the center and the focus of the center. So as I'm sure most of you are aware, and as our president likes to remind us, we are now a government-supported institution, not a government-funded institution. And so that became a significant consideration. And Lynn did a lot of work, developed a lot of inroads and relationships, and now it's time to connect those relationships to the work of the faculty members that are in Nanaimo and to some programming that we can offer here in Parksville at this particular site. So over the last year, we've taken the time to analyze and flesh out the strategic direction of the Center for Healthy Aging, and most recently to develop a viable business plan. And that's the work that we're doing right now to address specific operational guidelines. So why that shift now? We want to really build on the strong connections that have been made in the last 2 years with some of our community partners. Parksville-Qualicum is a community that's been very supportive of VIU's continued presence, and certainly our partnership with the city and the centre is a good indication of that. As you well know, the area demographics and a projected job deficit in healthcare and related occupations outline a really clear opportunity for the presence of a Centre for Healthy Aging that is focused on educational types of activities with a really unique flavor that I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. The current state that we have is not financially sustainable, and so it's really important that we come up with a plan that will make the centre financially sustainable with a really clear direction and a strategic focus. And so we've thus decided to sort of wrap up the whole centre here and all of our operations here into a Centre for Healthy Aging with that as a focus and bring it under the auspices of the Faculty of Health and Human Services. Thus, some changes in the nature of the programming that's going on here. So what do we see as the opportunity? First of all, the population that's here, Vancouver Island's age profile is substantially older relative to BC overall. 10% over the age of 75, and that's expected to grow by 17% over the next 20 years or so. The major growth in the Parksville-Qualicum area is in the ages of over 75, with an average of 112% increase versus Vancouver Island that's 104%. So very important to begin educating people about how to service the older adult population. There are some other shifts in demographics which, being the council, I'm sure you're quite familiar with as you try to struggle with the services that you need to provide here. The area of nursing and healthcare is the #1 area for job creation and growth on Vancouver Island over the next 15 to 20 years. And so we really want to focus in that area in the work that we're doing. Particularly in the area of nursing, there will be a number of specialties. The need to understand the older adult and be able to work with the older adult is key, and that's a key focus, a strategic focus that we see for the centre. The competitive environment is really good for us in that only Simon Fraser University recognizes gerontology as a major area of study in British Columbia from a broad interdisciplinary type of perspective. So we have the opportunity to work with the population here and at the same time to provide education for that 25 to 50 age group, which is beginning to grow in the Parksville-Qualicum area. We've looked at some of the risks. Certainly the size of the population around here is relatively small, and that's been kind of an ongoing issue for us. And so we're looking at alternative modes of delivery in order to mitigate that type of risk. The market, you're quite familiar with Elder College and the work that Elder College does out of this centre. An excellent market, but again, limited. And so we need to figure out how to expand those opportunities for the involvement of older adults in the Centre for Healthy Aging. So we're looking at a strategic vision that positions the Parksville-Qualicum Centre as a self-sustaining and locally managed unit providing educational programming on healthy aging, as well as experiential learning for existing age-related programs. So being able to connect our students from the Nanaimo campus into this area, working on undergraduate research projects, as well as engaged in placements and so on. We really see the Centre for Healthy Aging, which came out of a recommendation from the regional plan at VIU, as being a location where a centre can build on VIU's tradition of engagement and collaboration with communities, their residents and organizations, as well as other universities and government agencies to generate, integrate, and apply knowledge that will both enrich the lives of older adults living in this area and inform policy and action for older populations in communities across the province. Our most recent vision is that a graduate diploma in gerontology or active aging will anchor a set of educational programs and community engagement activities here at the VIU Parksville Qualicum Centre, with the Centre for Healthy Aging being located there. Students from Parksville and Nanaimo will be involved in experiential education and undergraduate research with older adults in the community, and local practitioners will have access to ongoing knowledge that they need to service that population. This is a little bit of a shift from more of a research focus into an educational focus, and that's what we've needed to take the time over the last little while to be able to do. The kinds of principles that will guide us in this work is that it must be self-sustaining, must be community engaged, there must be a coherence of the programs so that they work together in a manageable way, and it maintains and builds on VIU's institutional profile. So we have 3 target markets: the elder community or the older adult through the Elder College provisions. And as we're beginning to develop the vision, the concept that those in the elder community, the older adult community, may be interested in co-teaching within our professional programs and bringing their knowledge and expertise as they age into the classroom, which is a really unique way of working with an educational program. The second market is the current healthcare professionals, so developing some professional development and training, expanding our professional development and training opportunities. And the third one is the aspiring healthcare professionals, so bringing students in that are new to the area, but really ensuring that they have good solid knowledge around the older adult and the needs of older adults as they graduate. So where do we go from here? We are far from finished in terms of fleshing out what it is that we want to do with the model and the specifics of all the programming. But we're now at a point where we felt we could lay out the vision for you, discuss that in a little bit more detail. We have to identify what some of the foreseeable challenges are and the risks relating to the model that we're considering for the programming, and develop some risk mitigation strategies. To that end, we've scheduled a focused community consultation to get a little bit deeper into the meat of things on May 21st. And so we'll be inviting some of the local practitioners, professionals, agency representatives, as well as any members of council that would like to join us to spend some time at that time talking about what are the things that make sense in terms of really consolidating this as a vision and a focus for Parksville Qualicum Centre for VIU. So thank you very much for listening. Nobody's kind of dragged me off. I think I'm within my 10 minutes, but I'm not sure. So open for questions.
Thank you very, very much. Questions from council? Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation. I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about the plans as you have them now in place for developing the graduate diploma in gerontology, and I didn't get quite the end of it. But do you foresee this having kind of an internship component or practicums or more of a classroom base, or will these be practitioners who will have opportunities to apply what they've learned or try something in the field, in the area, and come back to the classroom inquiry? Or, I'm just curious about that.
Sure. I don't have a lot of detail. Thank you for the question. So just so people know, my background is not the elderly population. It's actually children and youth. And so one of the things we're working on right now is seeking someone to take some really strong leadership in that area. But what I can say is that we envision a delivery model that would work for people who are existing professionals in the field from a broad interdisciplinary type of approach. So people working in recreation, people working in nursing and in healthcare, people working in some of the affiliated professions such as physiotherapy or occupational therapy, coming together for classroom-based experiences, probably people that are already employed. Definitely a practicum. That's a mainstay of all of the programs within our faculty and an important component of the educational programming that we offer in health and human services, but delivered in more of a hybrid institute type of format so that we can maximize the use of the space here with our programming. So people would come in for a weekend, do some face-to-face programming, they would go away, they'd do some online coursework through that course, and would apply the theoretical concepts in the work that they're doing. The practicum would probably be a capstone type of course where they can synthesize all of the coursework that they've done into either a different type of professional experience from what they already have, or more of a research or project-based type of practicum. Does that help? Yeah.
Any other members of council? Councillor Owens.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The Centre for Healthy Aging, is there similar facilities or programs elsewhere in Canada? And if so, where? And do we have an opportunity to be unique here and become the premier age-friendly jurisdiction?
Well, if you Google Center for Healthy Aging, you will get a large number of hits. And so this is one of the questions is how do we distinguish ourselves and what it is that we do here, both I think in name and also in approach, right? So centers for healthy aging are found in hospitals, for example, that kind of focus on more of a service delivery piece. York University and UBC, Simon Fraser all have something equivalent to a Center for Healthy Aging with primarily a research focus. And so that's the distinguishing feature for us is the educational focus, the engagement focus, and the experiential learning focus for the students. So it's that programming mix that's going to make a difference for us. And then one of my visions, which hopefully will sort of come to fruition, is that notion of being able to actively involve the older adults in this community in the delivery of that programming. And I think that will be a key distinguishing feature. So.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do applaud you for actively putting together something that is interdisciplinary. I think that it really enriches the experience and brings different voices, perspectives, and experience to the group. It also reminds me of our nearby Oceanside Health Center and some of the work that they're trying to do and set up things differently. And I was just curious to know what sort of communication you've had with them or awareness of what they're trying to do there.
I'm pretty regularly in touch with Island Health, and I attended the Island Health Board was doing a bit of a circuit last spring where they were going to various communities, and I attended both in Nanaimo and here in Parksville. Got a good sense from them of their direction with Oceanside at that point, and they are certainly one of the organizations that will involve in defining more clearly what it is that are opportunities that we can connect with them around. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. I have a few comments. I sent Dr. Whitty a two-pager. I was asked to meet with the Island Health folk because we obviously need to collaborate, and as mayor, you know, we want Parksville to be a place where people come here to live and they come here to stay. They don't go anywhere. They stay here for the rest of their lives, and that's the objective. And frankly, in some ways, it's an economic one too. But there are a lot of challenges. You know, the average age of a doctor in Oceanside is 59 years of age. So we're going to be working on that in terms of doctors' recruitment. We also have the medical and non-medical home care issue. The government's saying, you know, stay in your homes, but you need that support. and of course all of the other things that you've talked about in terms of educating people, and the emphasis is on healthy living, not on necessarily, we'll all have our bobos, I guess, as we get older, and my colleague here can attest to that. But anyway, but I think the issue of respite care becomes a big issue too, and there's a lot of great organizations within the city of Parksville. And one of the reasons that I'm here is because I know about all of these organizations. They're fantastic, and they're prepared to collaborate, and they're prepared to work, and they're prepared to share what they provide in terms of services, whether that's the SOS, whether that's the Salvation Army, the Parksville District Association for Community Living. The list just goes on and on and on. And I think that we're going to have to help ourselves. I don't think we can rely on government for everything. So along with yourselves, Island Health and all of these other great organizations that we have, not only within Parksville but within the Oceanside area, I think it'll be a model or could be a model for people to follow. So thank you very much once again for coming. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and we're pleased to be here to share what we're doing. And I know there was, some angst about what was VIU really doing, but you can see we've been investing a fair bit of time and energy in getting our place in order so that we could move on and work collaboratively and cooperatively with you as well. So look forward to it.
Thank you very much. And it's okay. Single malt Scotch always works for me. What a sequence tonight, because we've just finished up on this healthy aging, and now we're going to hear from Dr. Paul Hasselbeck, the Medical Health Officer for Island Health, and I'm sure he's going to tell us a little bit about some of the aging statistics, because I attended your presentation last week at the RDN board. So welcome, Dr. Hasselbeck, once again, and you're no stranger to Parksville. You're always welcome to talk about what's going on, and over to you. 10 minutes.
Your Worship and members of Council, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. To your administration and your honored guests as well. If I could actually just get this presentation to come back up. Somehow it disappeared on me, and I apologize. For those of you who are new to Council, I am your Medical Health Officer. Others have had an opportunity to see me come by annually for the last few years, and I will continue to do that as long as you allow me to do so. I try to report out on the well-being of the community, and if we were to take a single measure of well-being, lots could be promoted, but I usually look at life expectancy, and we can look at the Qualicum local health area, which is third from the right here with the broad red arrow on it. And one of the good things is that in this area, and not surprisingly, life expectancy, at least for women, is significantly longer by about a year than that for the island as an average and for BC as an average. It is notable that when we break this down by gender, that the male life expectancy is only at average. So there's room for gender improvement here. Likewise, if we were looking at a global measure of community well-being or socioeconomic status, BC Statistics has incorporated a variety of different measures into a single unit. And for those that are familiar with my graphs, I tend to put those measures which are not so good to the left-hand side, and those that are better than average for, in this case, the province, which is at 0, to the right. So here we are looking at Qualicum, certainly better than average. For some reason, BC Stats makes this a negative number, and we wonder why people don't like statisticians. I don't blame you. But overall, the well-being of the community does reflect both its economic status as well as an overall thriving within the community, both of which Council should take some credit for. As you enter into this 4-year mandate, I'd like to put a few challenges out to you. Some of them I think have already been communicated. One I think you're well familiar with, and that is the implementation of definitive solution on drinking water, and I'm happy to take questions later on if you wish. You should have a communication from me or coming from me in conjunction with the Executive Director of the Canadian Cancer Society in regards to trying to bring Parksville up to a same level as other communities relative to clean air bylaws and addressing tobacco and now e-cigarette use. I know you're grappling with the issue of outdoor burning restrictions. Continued support for the Oceanside Community Health and Wellness Network. And as you'll see as I go through the presentation, I think there's growing need for and hopefully some support from Council on poverty reduction activities. There are a variety of data sources that we can access, one of which you are encouraged to read is on the Island Health website relative to the local health area profiles. Lots of information and data in there, and I try to condense that down into a few minutes as I present this to you. I don't do any justice to it, so do take some time to read through the whole document, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. For those of you who aren't familiar with how geography has been split up, sometime late in the 1960s, local health areas were divided basically on the old school division districts. In this case, the school division of 68 still remains with the same boundaries. Local health area was named Qualicum, and sometimes you'll see me migrating and using Oceanside, and might be helpful if we made some decisions on names. I hear both being bantered about frequently. This year, with the release of the National Household Survey and Census information, we have detailed information available at a smaller school community level, which I've flagged up here for the whole of the Qualicum School District, and I'm going to be able to show you some of that data. It's not that often we can get data down into a sub-regional area, and I think you'll find some of it quite interesting. As I've indicated in the past, it's nice to be able to look at a variety of determinants of well-being. I do appreciate these are data-dense slides, and we're able to bring together 4 years of data for you on a single slide. And if we were looking at something up towards the top there, such as children in need of protection, it being on the right here, for whatever reason we don't see a lot of need for children's services or children in need of protection within this community, and I think that's a good thing. Those looking to the little bit to the left here are perhaps opportunities for improvement, and I'm going to talk a little bit about more detail about the early development instrument, which is the bottom two of these, as well as some education outcomes, and again something I think that this council needs to be taking more attention to. We can also take a look at some very good measures such as lower levels of employment assistance requirements, whether that is due to changes in the program or whether that's actually due to improving economic status in the community. I think both are viable explanations at this point. As I said, we can start taking a look at a more sub-regional level, and I just thought I'd flag a couple of these. This is the proportion of families that are led by a single parent, and this is all families. So just as a simple way of doing this, you can double that proportion when we're talking about where families are led and children are present. So roughly speaking, in the Parksville area, we're looking at 25 to 30% of families led by a single parent. That proportion of single-parent families continues to increase across census, and something that perhaps in terms of family structure is in need of greater support. Likewise, we've been looking at more detail on the proportion of families living in low-income settings. And for the whole of the Qualicum area, it's not quite as good as the island average, and certainly several percentage, almost 10% higher than BC is an average. And so these are children that, the term sometimes children living in poverty comes forward. If we break that down now into the sub-regional areas, notable is that within Parksville itself, we're looking at about 25% of children under the age of 6 that are living in impoverished conditions. Gain a little bit more detail we can actually go cross-census and by age and look at these populations. And this is something I do want Council to take a look at fairly carefully. If we're comparing ages against the proportion living in impoverished conditions, under the age of 6 across Canada and BC, we're talking about 1 in 6. In Parksville, we're getting closer to 1 in 3. If, however, you go to the other end of the age stream that we've been talking about here, Parksville does exceptionally well compared to the province, so and Canada as a whole. So what you've got is a real discrepancy in terms of the distribution of impoverishment within the community, and something that I'd like to bring to your attention, and maybe something that deserves a bit more attention at a local level. Just as I'm approaching towards the end here, there are some other good positive measures. Housing stock continues to be something that we're all concerned about in terms of quality of housing. Overall, housing in the Qualicum area remains much better than the island as a whole. I mentioned the Early Development Instrument, and for those of you who aren't familiar, this is a measure that's undertaken in kindergarten of children just starting school. Best way to think of this is the proportion of children who are prepared to start school. And unfortunately, again, in that statistical quirk, numbers that are higher are poor, and numbers getting worse is not so good. We would almost expect Qualicum to be sitting over here based on its socioeconomic index. Unfortunately, it sits over here relative to a higher proportion of children that are vulnerable when they start school. That's more in keeping with that proportion living in poverty, and a fairly significant increase between the two waves of 2009-11 to 2012 and 13. And again, what we've got is the increased vulnerability of children starting school, headed in the wrong direction, perhaps again a need for focus on children as an emphasis within this council. I can extend that further when we're looking at the grade 7 and grade 4 reading results. And here, when we're looking over time, these continue to drop. So as the cohort of children is going through school, their academic success is not as good as what's happening on the island, despite their overall socioeconomic well-being. And I've been sharing this lately, and this is high school graduation rates. BC is at the top. Then I'm Ladysmith only for comparison because there is a significant gap there, and while Qualicum started off fairly well, we've seen a real drop-off in the last few years. I'm not quite sure what the explanations are for this, but it's certainly something that Council can engage itself in with its school districts relative to trying to ensure the well-being overall of students and children and the thriving of the future of this community. Something I've stressed in the past, that sustainability isn't going to be solely dependent upon immigration into the community. It's going to be about retaining and sustaining families and children, and not exporting that as one of your major exports, which seems to be the situation. There are some very significant differences that show up when we look in Qualicum relative to family structures. I won't get into the detail on this, but just that you've got differences of family structure is something you should be aware of. And with that, Your Worship, members of Council, I'm happy to take questions on the presentation and anything else since I'm here.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hasselbeck, and I can assure you that amongst the councillors that we have on this council, there's a lot of experience in some of the stats that you've shown us this evening. Questions for Dr. Hasselbeck? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. I did make some notes because some of the slides that you showed us surprised me. The child protection slide, if you could bring that back up.
That's why I shouldn't have taken this out. Yep, but go ahead.
In my daytime life, I'm a child protection social worker, and we can't keep up. And so I'm very surprised. We cover the whole Oceanside area, School District 69. And so I'm very surprised that you have that as a good number, because that's not what it is on the ground. Is it that one? Yeah, Because, and so what you're saying is we have 60 or 50?
No. And through your worship,
Yeah.
the way the slide is set up, it is the rate of children in need of protection compared to the island.
Oh, okay.
And this is 40 to 50% less than the island. What's notable, though, and I didn't bring this slide, but I can always share it, is when we compare the island to BC, there seems to be a 25 to 30% higher rate of children in care and in protection on the island.
Yes.
And if we look across the island, we have rates that are 3 to 4 times higher than the province, as well as rates that are slightly less than the provincial average. Qualicum shows up to be slightly less, even if you're believing that your levels of activity are fairly high. They're not as high as other offices.
Others, yeah. Okay,
That's
so
all.
another follow-up question is the slide with the health needs of seniors, youth, etc. What about the child and youth mental health? What we're finding in this community is we have a lot of youth with mental health issues that were unable to access services. And so I think that needs to be a focus. I think at the bottom when you said we should pay attention to that. And it's not on this slide, it's another one. But the thing is they aren't able to access mental health. When they're in a crisis, they go to the hospital, they get back here before the RCMP do. And so the question I have, is there going to be any focus on that? Because it is an empty spot in this community.
Just before you answer, we get mental health services from 10 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon in our area, and that's it, just Monday to Friday.
So through your worship, and this is why I come here, and I do appreciate you bringing up the question on children's mental health. It's a common theme. I would say that we are actually going to put out a mental health report in the next year or two. I'm just not quite sure when that's going to happen. Because of the increases that are being reported. There's some good information, and I haven't brought that along for you, and that's why I say there's always so much information in the McCreary report on school relative to mental well-being. There are certainly measures that aren't changing, but are being better measured now. There are indications such as schools have actually been a safer place with less bullying and sort of interrelational problems occurring, so less actually occurring when there might be a perception that there's more. And there are certainly some indications that things like anxiety, family relations, support aren't necessarily doing as well between the different waves of McCreary. There's also some good information on overall mental health within the community coming off the Canadian Community Health Survey. So lots of good information out there. As I say, it just hasn't been a focus of where I've come to you tonight.
So just to touch on why this is an issue for more of a touchy issue for this area is in 1997 we had a rash of youth suicides. They made a suicide pact. And so as a child protection social worker, I'm really close to the ground on what's happening with the youth in our community. And, you know, that really, and that's what I hear the service providers saying. We don't want another 1997. And that is a big hole in the services that we have. There's a one drop-in day at Family Place for children and youth with mental health issues. And they're undiagnosed. They're almost like a hot potato. And so I think we need to really address that holistically throughout the whole health system. It's sort of like if you're physically ill, it's okay. But if you're mentally ill or you have some emotional needs, it's not viewed as an illness the same way as a physical illness. And so I think we need to really work on that. And I'm saying tonight that I'm putting my voice forward to have something done about it.
Thank you, and through your worship, it's nice to hear that. It's something that needs to be said to the managers and directors within Island Health. I can always convey that back. Happy to do so.
Councillor Veal.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Dr. Hasselback, thank you very much for this. And I really appreciated you coming because I had read the PowerPoint, but of course it needed a little more explanation than the graphs. I was wondering if you could go to the slide where there's a different rates of poverty or the numbers of children, but then we also have the older age. So we've got right up to 65. Is that the one? Oh, okay. Now, at first glance, I look at this and I think, well, if we can get some of the 65 plus together with the under 6 crowd and maybe, support one another, that might help. But I do appreciate seeing rates of poverty cited as contributing to health, because I certainly believe it and know that it has a huge role to play in the well-being and certainly of our younger children. Now, you've mentioned something about strategies for poverty reduction. In your work, do you come across communities that are working on different strategies to reduce poverty among children and other age groups? And do you have words of wisdom for us to take away on this topic?
Thank you. Through your worship, I really do appreciate the question. There are several communities that are nearby have been taking up this challenge. There's no single solution. People will talk about, investments in childcare, something that you can stimulate as a council. They'll talk about improvements in terms of the more homogeneous distribution of socioeconomic groupings within the planning, and I can get into a long list of options. What's more important, though, is that the community begin to look at defining what their own strategy is. Now, I've heard that there's a group in Oceanside looking at this, and as you're connected, you may know more about that than I do. I certainly am more familiar with similar groups that are looking at this in a couple of other areas within the Central Island.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for coming forward. I'm wondering if you could go to the slide that we looked at graduation and reading levels. I think it was a high school 6-year graduation rate where it really drops, but I think there's one, I'm not sure if there was one other one. So we talk a little bit about standards in reading and in writing, and that's really current. It's 2014, and you're going back those 4 years. So can we go back to the other slide as well, where it shows a really drop? So specific to the District 69, we had a reamalgamation of schools and school closures. And do you know, or can you summarize, or do you have any idea why maybe that we've dropped? Is it because of, moving children around?
So through your worship, I'm going to say I would merely be speculating at this point in time relative to why we're seeing these drop-offs. And I'm going to say one of the joys that you have is that you're free to ask these questions of the school district just as you ask of me.
Thank you.
Councillor Oates.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Hasselbeck. There's no question that there's many different facets of the healthcare assistance, healthcare system that needs attention. There's no doubt about that. And we're just one city. If you, as our chief medical officer, if you were to give this council some advice of where we should be focusing in the next little while, in the short term and in the long term, would you care to take that opportunity to give that advice?
So thank you. And through your worship, I think that some of what I laid out from what I would like council to consider forms a portion of that agenda, but I will say some of that also reflects regulatory responsibilities that I have for as well. So there's a bit of a mixing in there. I do think that some of these educational outcomes and outcomes for children do need some attention, and whether that's done through a children's strategy or children's approach or just engagement and sort of begin asking the questions, what more can be done for children and students. I think that's one. I think the second one that I'd seriously be considering is beginning to look at what are the implications of this maldistribution of poverty within your own community, particularly as it relates to children. So those might be the two that I put at the top of the list. I certainly recognize that all councils are actively interested in economic thriving, and I think this council has actually been fairly successful in that over the years. If we start looking at some of the demographics, I think that it's legitimate to start asking, is the approach sustainable relative to depending upon resources coming into the community versus what's going to be nurtured locally?
Well, thank you very, very much again, Dr. Hasselbeck. As always, we'll look forward to seeing you in the future. I just have a couple of statistics for you that was given to us by the Salvation Army. They spend $35,000 a year on food for school children. They provide 100 meals at every 4 days a week at their church here, and one day of the week they go to St. Stephen in Qualicum Beach, 100 hot meals at lunchtime. And they provide 400 food baskets to families in a month. That's just the Salvation Army. So there's a lot of groups that are clued into what's going on and helping out. And I'm the city representative on the Regional District and Nanaimo Board, and we're in the process of looking at helping out the social services within the Regional District of Nanaimo, which includes Parksville, Qualicum Beach, because there are some areas where the poverty rates are greater than others. And finally, we have a great committee. Who's on that committee from council here? But we have a great committee on homelessness. I believe it's Councillor Salter. And they're doing a lot of great work. I think the objective now is, what's it called? Home first? Or go ahead. Do you want to? Housing first? So and we've been working on that for a while. I think we had about 65 people that are declared homeless. Do you want to give us some more statistics on that?
Yeah, and they did just open. I don't have the statistics, but they did just open, and it's actually quite busy. So.
And our homeless don't live in town. They live in rural areas, so it becomes even more difficult. And we have an outfit called Man and Ministries that goes around and provides food and clothing to people. So it's a recognizable situation that's happening, which confirms your statistics.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And one of the shortcomings of only your 10 minutes is that there's a long list of successes, and I'm glad you sort of flagged some of them. And I do want to appreciate the council that when I present, I tend to present those things that perhaps you're not aware of and perhaps need some attention. I really do want to compliment this council because I know you've been grappling with a variety of different issues, tough ones, and moving forward on them, and I encourage you to continue to do so.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Okay, Council, we are now on item number 4 under reports. Advisory Design Panel. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Salter. Any comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Mr. Russell, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding the reconsideration of a development permit, 826 Island Highway West?
I'll do my best, Your Worship. At our last council meeting, a development permit was before council for consideration of issuance. It is for renovations to Wembley Mall and as well as some facade adjustments to Canadian Tire. At that meeting, council was of the opinion that one of the guidelines was not being satisfied. The permit was not granted issuance. It was rejected with specific instruction to the applicant to address the issue of pedestrian connectivity from the southwest corner of the property towards the buildings. The proponent has since revised their landscaping plan and now has 2 paths one through the mall. To the mall, it's a new concrete sidewalk across the landscaped area, and then as well as some painted lines across the existing paved surface.
Thank you very much. And since this is an item that we're familiar with, we'll move the 3 recommendations. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Beal, Councillor Salter. Any comments? Seeing none? Oh, yes, Councillor Beal.
I would just like to express appreciation to the developer for not only addressing this request at a minimal level, but going beyond that to link the pedestrian pathway not only directly to the mall, but also to the safe pedestrian route over to Oceanside Place. So I think they've, personally, I think they've addressed this issue very nicely.
Thank you very much. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. And now we have item C. Councillors Beale and Oates, would you please give us the background on this particular issue regarding the spring 2015 grant and aid applications?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Beale and myself met with Deputy Corporate Officer Weeks. We reviewed the list of applicants for the grant and aid. All of the applicants which were approved met the criteria set out as per council policy, so we were pleased to approve all of those requests. The Ravensong Breakers Aquatic Club didn't meet the criteria, unfortunately, and we're unable to approve them. And it's our recommendation that this $2,500 be allocated from the 2015 grant and aids budget.
So I gather that yourself, Councillor Oates, and Councillor Beale are the movers and seconders. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one question. I noticed the Parksville and District Historical Society, $400. I think that society has got, what, $1 million in the bank? If I'm not right?
Councillor Oates?
I don't believe that we have access to that sort of information. Their criteria, I believe that they submit a budget. The budget that they submitted was satisfied the criteria as set out in the policy. I don't know that we have access to what their bank account is or what their investments are or how much they're worth. Or I don't believe that's part of the policy.
As the liaison a couple of years ago, I brought back a report to the city, and that is what they had. But I think Councillor Powell probably was a liaison after me or before me. I don't know.
Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, it sort of ticked for me too, because they did have $1 million. But I think what Councillor Oates and Councillor Beale ran into, they didn't have that history, and they were presented with the criteria, which was the budget, and so they didn't have the information, and so it's come forward to this.
Councillor Greer, follow-up?
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up, I think their $1 million is invested, of course, and I think they operate on the interest, and that's probably what you saw as far as a financial report goes. But anyways, just a question. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight in Tofino, at their council, they will be having a community open house to decide where the community feels that their grants should be used. And so I'm looking forward to seeing where they think that their grant program by the community should be looked at. And just a little follow-up with the Parksville and District Historical Society. I am the liaison in that, and yes, it is by interest, and it's very set on where they spend their money, and it is definitely under $100 million, and it is based on the markets, so they have actually lost a little bit of money as well. So,
any further comments, Councillor Beale?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a point of clarification for Teresa Patterson. When the word grant was mentioned there, I presume they're not talking about where this particular money might be used, but some other money, because this money was specifically earmarked for a project that would cost about $400.
This property is in contravention of Section 5 of the city's property maintenance bylaw. It's the 13th year this property has been the cause of complaints regarding the unsightly nature due to accumulation of rubbish, unsightly growth, and lack of maintenance. Staff are following Council Policy 3.14 and the Property Maintenance Bylaw in attempt to gain compliance from the property owner, and staff's recommendation is as per the Council agenda.
Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Beale, seconded by Councillor Salter. Any questions on this particular item? I should point out that Councillor Beale and I had an opportunity to visit the site while one of the neighbors had a fence down. And I guess, is it proper for me to ask for anybody in the audience that has any comments to make on this? Mrs. Weeks, no? No? Okay. We visited the site, and you've got pictures there that a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Sorry, if you wanted public to speak, you just have to pass a motion.
Is there anybody in the audience that'd like to speak to this item? Okay, seeing none. Therefore, we don't need that motion. So I'm going to wait. I guess I'll wait for Councillor. He's back. He can vote standing up. Yeah, Councillor Oates.
The background information that's been supplied to Council with respect to this issue indicates that this has been an ongoing problem for some 13 years. Is that correct? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Salter.
I don't know if it's okay to say this even here, but when I look at the pictures, I almost think I'm looking at hoarding, which would be a mental health issue and is never going to get fixed with a bylaw.
We consulted with Dr. Hasselbeck, as a matter of fact, and this is really an unsightly premise bylaw, which applies. And I can tell you that the neighbors the neighbors that are close by, they are totally fed up. They're totally fed up. Did I misunderstand your
Maybe.
comment?
I don't disagree with. I agree with what you're saying. I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate.
I would just, Mr. Mayor,
For,
I think we're starting to get into uncharted territory here. I don't know if it's,
I can respond. There's no way that we can go there. We can only deal with the unsightly premises. There's no other way we can go anywhere else but there for now, anyway. Because we'll wait and see how the owner responds. Okay. Yes, Councillor Beale.
And just to add to that piece, I know that avenue was explored. Was there the possibility, and I don't think that came across, but there were questions through to Dr. Hasselbeck and to others, like is there another way to approach this that might be more compassionate, understanding, help, etc., but it was determined that no, there wasn't.
Okay. Seeing no further comments, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the two recommendations? Thank you. That is carried. All right. We're moving on. Item number 5, bylaws. We have 3 readings for two bylaws for 3 readings this evening. The first bylaw is the 5-year financial plan bylaw 2015 to 2019, number 1517. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale. Any comments? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. I know this is going to lead into the second one as well, and I don't have any trouble with the 1.5 increase in taxes this year. I just have a problem, and I guess I explained that over the last week or so, that I have a problem in how we got there and what we discussed and what we didn't discuss. So that's the only problem I have. As far as the 1.5% increase, I'm good with that. But I'm just not extremely happy with how we got there. And we've really done the same thing over the last 6 years. We've kind of skipped a lot of important items. And anyways, that's my comment.
Any further comments? Councillor Salter and then Councillor Patterson.
I would just like to echo what Councillor Greer just said. I also agree that it was how we reached this point. We did not go through line items. We really just looked at the big items that were given us in the beginning of February. And so I don't feel that we have had an in-depth look at this budget. Nevertheless, I also get that there doesn't appear to be much of an appetite to do that. So I just echo his sentiments.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. This was our first budget of this council, and going forward, I think that we will all voice our opinions and have our voices heard. And I would like, at this point in time, for my council and that to consider that next year that we look at a 2 to 2.5% increase, and that we dedicate a 0.5% to revitalization.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Oates.
Well, I'm concerned that members of council believe that they haven't had the opportunity to debate the budget into detail to which they wanted to debate it. I don't know how many meetings we had. I don't recall the debate being stifled. I know I certainly brought up all the items I wanted to bring up, so I'm a little bit perplexed that here today we're now complaining that we didn't have the opportunity to talk about our budget items. I don't understand how that happened when we had so many meetings here. We all had the same information. If there was questions that needed to be asked, they should have been asked at that time. After the motion was passed at our last meeting, we again revisited some of the budget items. So to come back again here tonight and say we didn't have an opportunity, I'm not sure what sort of forum you need in order to discuss the budget in a more open, transparent manner than was done. So I'm a little bit confused.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just as a follow-up to Councillor Oates' statement, I did not really hear from others that the word opportunity was used. I think that we all acknowledge that there have been opportunity, but also echoing Councillor Patterson's statements, this is a first budget for this particular council. Some of the members are new on council, and the whole process, speaking personally, has really been a learning experience. I think I have a much deeper understanding, although not complete, and I think it will inform my own judgment and the questions that I would ask as we move forward. But we have spent a lot of time on this, and we've, I think we've made some real gains, and it's a good starting point for the time ahead.
Okay, Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have spent a lot of time, and we haven't discussed that many articles in the budget. And I'd like another year when we receive, it seems to me that every meeting that we have, we're led by the city with a different set of numbers, different set of ideas. Some items are taken out, some are put in, and we seem to ramble through about 5 or 6 meetings on their agenda. And I think we should really, I know and I've made many budgets for myself in different companies, and I know if, for instance, if I'm doing $1 million worth of business and I want to increase my income by $50,000, I have to not only make greater sales, but I also have to take a look at where my spending is. And I might have to cancel a new car at $30,000 that I wanted. So it's a situation here where we seem to feel we have unlimited funds and we can put through many articles. I don't think at the end of the day the idea is to spend all the money that we have. And a lot of it has gone on computers and softwares. I don't know, this year it's $250,000. That's a lot of software. That's a lot of computers. And other years we've gone through almost the same amount of software, computers, whiteboards, you name it. And there's a never-ending list of what the city would like for themselves. And I think those are a lot of the items that maybe another year, and I'm not going to debate this anymore tonight, but another year I think we should have, instead of being led by the city with different pieces of information on every meeting, we should have one budget and then take a look at it. If we want to take something out, we take it out so we know that it's out. And if we want to put something in, if council wants to put something in, we can do that. But anyways, that's the last of my discussion on this. Thanks.
Yeah, you know, Councillor Greer, I understand what you're saying, but I can't agree with you. I mean, we wrestled with a lot of issues over the last several budget meetings that we've had. With all due respect, you know, running a city is not a business. It's not like running a business. There's things that businesses wouldn't do that the city does, and we're committed to doing. What I certainly intend on doing as mayor next year in terms of a directive to council is that in between the budget meetings, if members of council want to pursue in more detail, they simply have to get a hold of the appropriate staff member and sit down with that staff member whenever both of them are available and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. What I do when I'm looking at the budget, I start off with the big numbers to see what they mean. I know the difference between an operational budget and a capital budget, and that sort of thing. So I think that this year I'm going to disagree with you that we haven't discussed it. I think we've discussed it fairly thoroughly. So anyway, Councillor Powell, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Worship. I did have my hand up, but I'm not going to feed into it.
Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to pick up again on something that Councillor Patterson mentioned. I too would very much like to see us move towards doing something concrete for the downtown revitalization. I did not push to have that included at this time in the budget because I don't really feel like we have enough information, as in concrete plans, implementation, costs, etc. So there again, it goes back to us being a new council and learning what we need to know to actually get these things into budget. So, but I think along with Councillor Patterson, I look forward to some of these things being considered in the next year. Thank you.
I'm going to call the vote on that for the 5-year financial plan 2015-2019, number 1517. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. The next item is the tax rates bylaw 2015, number 1518. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Oates. Any comments? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. We have one bylaw for final adoption this evening. That's the Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2015, number 2000.99. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by yes, Councillor Oates. Sorry, I thought that was over. Okay, I need a mover and a seconder for that financial, that 5-year financial plan bylaw 2015-19, 15-17. We did it. Okay, I'm never sure because I'm looking. I've got copies here, and I thought I didn't need to do it. Thank you, Mrs. Weeks. All right. So, one bylaw for final adoption. Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2015, number 2000.99. I have a mover, Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Greer. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, new business. Let's. Has everybody got an item for new business this evening? No? Councillor Patterson, you don't? I'm going to start from the right side and go to the left. Councillor Salter, you're on.
Thank you. So, where are we here? I would like to move that the City of Parksville direct the Englishman River Water Service to use internal staff and resources to explore a number of alternative sources and ways of providing potable water for the city with a report to City Council within 90 days. I need a seconder for that.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? Seconding that? Okay. Discussion on the motion.
So the discussion is that there are alternatives to using high-pressure membrane processes if the water harvested is not as turbid as that coming from the Englishman River. There are also alternative sources of water that may be as cost-effective or even less costly as the multi-million-dollar water treatment plant and river intake system currently planned for. 2 weeks ago, we saw an outline by Trevor Wicks as just one alternative. There are others that appear to have been discounted much too fast by the ERWS. Given that grants are currently uncertain, Qualicum and French Creek have stepped out of this. Also, they are a long time coming, if at all, for grants. There is time over the next 90 days to have staff take a look at some alternatives. We must be prepared to implement another plan if the current plan is in imminent danger of falling through. We shouldn't keep all of our eggs in one basket and it would be sensible for us to come up with other options just in case.
Okay, any further comments? Councillor Powell and Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. 5 years ago, before you got here, Councillor Salter, we did have a bunch of different options that were presented to staff. We hired an international renowned consultant to help us deal with the water issues. Some of the options that were put forward by Mr. Wicks had been looked at, had been rejected because of the cost. I'm not prepared to spend any more money on more options when we have a perfectly good option on the floor right now. And I think that what we need to do is move on with it. And I'm not in favor of this motion, and I will not be in favor of any other motions that you might bring forward with this regard.
Councillor Greer.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think if staff was to bring back some of those suggestions that we had in the early days and maybe make a list of them and bring it back to council to show the new councillors what has been done, and maybe the public as well, just to satisfy everybody so that we can get on with this program.
Councillor Salter, I see a similarity to this motion and the motion that you made during the budget discussions when you said that you sent out a figure of about $600,000 to do the studies.
Yeah, I do want to speak to that. Thank you for bringing it up. That $600,000, well, I'm not an engineer, so really I had no idea what number to come up. That was the CAO who asked me. It wasn't in my motion, and that would be something that I would expect would be brought forward by staff. What I can say is this, though. If we took a tenth of 1% of the potential $37 million, or 37,000, and that resulted in a savings of 25%, you'd be reducing the cost of that project by just about $10 million. So I think it's well worth looking at other options. I know it's what the community wants. I can say that this motion that I brought forward was helped be created by the community. So I'm not speaking for myself. I represent the community. That's why I'm sitting in this seat right now. And so it's not about the ERWS to me. It's not about what anyone else is. It's about what the community are asking for. And this is what they want. And I don't see how it is that we can't provide for the community what they want. If there are other options that are out there, and I know there are, then we should be looking at them. And I will say this. I did bring up primary water. All in, $30,000. That's all in. So that's the water is in the tap and the tap is open from beginning to end, and that hasn't even been considered. So I have to say that I know there's other options. I know they're very inexpensive. They're not $40 million. And if we get the grants, if the DFO allow that intake, if at this point we're down to 2 members involved in the ERWS, we have to look at other options. That is the diligent thing to do. We have a responsibility to the community. They're asking for this, and we need to provide it for them. It's not about what we want or how we feel or how upset it makes us feel, because we've been at it for however many years. I've lived in this community for a long time, probably longer than anybody else at this table, and I know Englishman River very well, and I know what's happening. I know the Parks and Water system, so I don't need to go on and on. It's what the community wants.
Thank you, Councillor Salter. I'm not so sure that I share your opinion that this is what everybody wants. I don't think this is what the majority wants, but we'll deal with that later on this evening. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is directed to Mr. Squire. I understand Councillor Salter's frustration and some of the community, but like Councillor Powell has said, we did look at several different options, and years ago, like over on one of my terms on council, so it's at least 4 or 5 plus years. So my question is, how difficult is it to bring back those studies, to show the public, to have an open house, to say, this is what we looked at, this is why we chose this project, and to show that why it was cost effective, why it was DFO, why we went to this plan. So I'm asking, because you have all that information.
Mr. Squire.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would certainly elaborate if I do have time. There are certain studies that, going back to the original regional water supply study, I believe it was started in 1973, that looked at all the surface water supplies within the region, including Cameron Lake, Englishman River, Bunnell Creek, and obviously the two rivers in Nanaimo River system, looking at a regional water supply for surface water. That started again back in '93. In 1983, it looked at more of the Englishman River and Cameron Lake system. Englishman River looking at impoundment options up in the Englishman River above the falls and actually below the Englishman River falls. In 1989, I believe that's when the city of Nanaimo decided to go it alone and look at their own surface water supply within their own watershed, which left Parksville, Qualicum Beach, French Creek, Nanoose area, etc., looking towards the surface water supplies within those reaches. There's also significant groundwater studies that have been conducted. The latest was several years ago. I don't know the exact date, when it was prepared and brought forward to the EWS board, looking specifically within this region, which is called the Parksville Aquifer and the Qualicum Beach Aquifer. All the 13 aquifers within the region, our aquifer, Parksville, and the Nanoose Aquifer. I'm not a hydrogeologist by any means, but they're certainly in the red as far as water being extracted out of those aquifers. We have known that for over 20 years. This is the reason why we're on surface waters, or we're looking at surface water supply as a secondary source of water. Groundwater yield is our cheapest source of supply. Number one, because you do not have to treat it right now other than chlorine residual for disinfection purposes in your water distribution system. Following up with surface water supply, it was further revisited in 1993. We looked at a higher intake just below the falls and another intake at the confluence of the South Englishman River and the Englishman River. That went forward, I believe, to a referendum which failed to build both the intake and dam. Don't quote me on dates, 1995, that referendum failed, and that is the reason why the community at that time decided to phase it in. That being phase one was the construction of the Arrowsmith Dam, and then the second phase would be the treatment, or pardon me, the new intake, and then following that would be treatment, which would be the third phase. As you know, back in 2009, that's when we were given the directive from the Health Authority to basically have water and enhanced water treatment for that surface water supply in the Englishman River. The reason why we're on the Englishman River is the province back in the 90s is basically focused the whole region to look at the Englishman River for a win-win basis. The Englishman River at that time in the 90s was on the endangered list in the province for fish habitat. It was a win-win. They knew we were looking at a possibility of the Englishman River or Cameron Lake or Bunnell Creek for impoundment. If we, knowing that we're going to build further storage impoundment, it was a win-win. We build impoundment. We build it not only for future water supply, but we also build it for fisheries purposes. And that's the reason why we use the Englishman River as a conduit to supply that water and then pick it up further downstream, because it's good for the environment. It actually helps recharge the aquifers, and it also is good for the fish. And then obviously helps us secure that water for not only for us, but for future generations. Further progression of the AWS, Qualicum Beach decided to opt out of the capital plan right now because they have sufficient water supply in their groundwater, unlike Parksville and Nanoose. They have sufficient water supply capacity for the next 20 years. That came out of the study of those 13 aquifers that was produced 3 years ago. That study is on our webpage. All the other previous documents, the 89, 1973, 83, all those studies aren't currently on there, but they're referenced in our current study materials that our consultants have referenced us. So getting back to your question, I'm sorry to be very long-winded, but there is a significant amount of history that has gone on to looking at the future water supply for the region. So how difficult would it be to produce all those studies? We could certainly make a motion tonight if you wish, and all those studies, we could certainly put them all as reference material on our webpage if so desired. But they, again, as mentioned, they are referenced in our current studies that the experts have looked at and analyzed and reviewed. The actual water treatment process, so the intake selection, we have narrowed it down. That was the focus of the associated engineering study, to look at the reach between the South Englishman River and our existing intake where it sits right now. So it comprises of a distance of roughly 10 kilometers of Englishman River. And it was a bit of a balance between what our health authority directive was. At that time, they wanted us to mitigate some of those potential risks for contaminants in the river, whereas the DFO wanted the intake as far downstream as possible. What we have in front of us, what produced was that matrix of looking at the three sustainable legs, being environment, being social and economics, plus risk, is we have the consultants have determined that the best location for the intake is just upstream of the Inland Island Highway. So that's where the intake sits right now. So there is a lot of that. But I hope. And then in regards to water treatment, we started that exercise over 3 years ago when after 2009, when we were mandated to get enhanced water treatment. We looked at all different water treatment technologies for the Englishman River. What you have to do with that is fingerprint that source of water and determine what is the best technology to treat that water. As we know, it's a very turbid water, and it changes in turbidity quite rapidly, within hours. You need a system that is robust and strong enough to take that impact, whereas conventional treatment with slow filtration certainly doesn't handle that. Our consultants looked at that. We also looked at rapid sand filtration and dissolved air flotation as well was looked at. So every type of treatment for surface water was certainly reviewed for the Englishman River, and it was narrowed down. We did a piloting test down at the Englishman River several years ago, 2 years ago, I believe, to pilot it on a very small scale to ensure, before we spend those millions of dollars, to ensure that that treatment does in fact work. And we did the two treatment, conventional treatment and membrane technology. So again, we've looked at intake, we've looked at the treatment type, and again, those are all those studies are currently on our webpage. We do also have when we first started embarking on, when the ERWS was formed, we created the web page for that purpose. We also created the web page to have a public information report. It's fairly lengthy that does outline all those historical details. We haven't updated it yet because there's certain other things that are coming to the board in regards to...
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah. Pardon me?
Can I ask a question? Do you know how much the website is viewed? Do you have a counter to say that we're actually getting people, how many hits exactly, that we're getting the information out to the public, that if they want to find it, they can find it? Do we know? I don't know if that could be directed to our communication officer.
We can get those numbers. They're available. I just don't know them
Awesome.
offhand.
Thank you. If you would please continue.
Any further, Councillor Salter, I'll get back to you. Any further questions for the first time? Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Worship. And a question again through to Mr. Squire. If I understood correctly, it was important for fisheries that any water that comes out of the river come out farther downstream and not upstream. Would that also hold true for taking water out of behind the dam? So, you know, in Arrowsmith Lake, like could water be taken out of that and it not be counted as water coming out of the river, or would that in fact have a negative impact on the fish health and the health of the river? I'm sorry, that's probably too many questions all at once. Sorry. What I'm curious about is, I mean, it's one thing when we talk about where the intake is placed on the river. Also, one proposal that was put forth that there be kind of like a side channel that's produced. But in my mind, that still equates to taking water out of the Englishman River system, albeit above the dam. Would that also have, if we did something like that, would this have a negative impact on fish habitat from what you understand?
Mr. Squire.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. To answer your question briefly, if I can be brief, yes, it would have an impact. You would formally have to apply for a license through the provincial branch. There's two types of licenses. There's non-consumptive and consumptive licenses. Currently, there is a non-consumptive license, which actually is a side channel. That was actually built after the dam for the purpose of fish rearing, the fish hatchery side channel. So it does the same benefit, but for fish.
Anybody else got a question? Is this your first time or your second?
Only half a time I've had.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe when we have the residents come to the town hall meeting and we let them ask the questions that they're concerned about, maybe we'll clear up all this matter once and for all. But it seems like we keep going around wanting different projects. But anyways, maybe it'll be cleared up at that time. Thanks.
And I'll have a statement to make later about the consultation process that's going to take place between now and the end of May. And I don't want to get into the paralysis of analysis. So, Councillor Salter.
Thank you. So back to that original motion and the discussion, which was we don't have any wells. We've stopped the work on the wells. The intake, we didn't get approval from DFO to do that. That's why they've put
Excuse me. Yes, we did.
Okay.
We're going to get it. We're going to get a construction permit this summer from DFO.
But we didn't get a construction permit, though. We don't.
We're going to get a construction permit from DFO this August.
Okay. So we don't have the grants. We don't have the wells.
We don't have a grant, Councillor Salter, because the provincial government has told us that they won't be announcing the grants until mid-October. They were supposed to announce the grants in mid-April of this year, and they won't be doing that until mid-October of this year.
We've spent $5.2 million so far, and we don't have any water. $5.2 million, I guess, is, well, it has to be okay. We've done it, but we have no other options. We have no other options. And I have to say, and keeping in mind that I'm speaking on behalf of the community, I speak for residents.
I speak on behalf of the community also.
So I just need to finish what I'm saying, if I may. So I'm speaking on behalf of residents here, and what I'm recognizing, what I'm seeing, is an absolute inability to even consider a second option, which would be, in my opinion, and I clearly in the opinion of residents, would be a sensible idea, and it would be a fiduciary. We would be diligent in doing so. We don't have another option, and I want to finish. We don't have another option. We don't have any. There's nothing that shows us the cost of the original reviews that were done with, for instance, Cameron Lake back in the 70s, which I question why we couldn't have used Cameron Lake back in the 70s. Nevertheless, I don't want to get into that here now, but what was the costs? Where are the dollars that were spent? What was the research that was used? And who did it? Where is this information? Because the community don't have it, that's correct. What do the community want? They want more options. I'm not going to stop asking. I'm asking on behalf of residents, so I will continue to ask on their behalf.
Thank you. I think we're ready to call the vote on Councillor Salter's motion. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is defeated. Thank you. Just a final comment on Cameron Lake. We're not allowed to take water out of Cameron Lake. The provincial government won't let us.
Yeah, I'm talking about the 70s. I do have another motion, though.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other new business, Councillor Salter?
So last meeting, when I made my original motion, I included a second motion in it, and that led to the defeat of that motion, and I didn't get to speak to that second motion, which was my own doing. But I would like to speak to this second motion that will stand alone, which is that staff arrange town hall meetings with council for residents to discuss, question, and engage in the process of water delivery for the city of Parksville every 2 months until residents feel that they have had enough engagement with council and with the city, and that they understand what we're doing, and that they're comfortable with what's going on. So that is my motion.
If you'll allow me, I was going to leave my new business to the end, but if you allow me to, before you make that motion, if you allow me to make my statement regarding the communication plan we have for the month of May, we can come back and visit your statement.
Point of order. I don't believe the motion has a seconder, Mr. Mayor.
Does the motion have a seconder? You're going to second it? Yeah. Okay. By Councillor Greer. I wanted to speak to it because I have an announcement to make this evening. I'm going to go last under new business, and I think that I can satisfy that motion if you want to hold on to it for a while. You want to postpone it? All right. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Although my understanding of the motion is that it's not necessarily limited to the Englishman River water supply. Is that correct? Can I get clarification? That the motion is about having regular town hall meetings that would be held every 2 months, regardless of the topic.
Is that your motion? Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That motion is defeated. Anything else on new business, Councillor Salter? I think I can satisfy your concerns later on in the meeting. Councillor Greer?
Nothing.
Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have a motion that the City of Parksville reinstate the low-flush toilet rebate program encompassing the following guidelines. 1, rebate is for replacement of older toilet that requires 13 or more liters per flush with a new low-flush toilet that requires 6 liters per flush or less. 2, rebate is a $75 for a low-flush toilet 6 liters or less. 3, new toilets must be CSA approved. 4, lifetime limit of 1 rebate per residence. 5, rebate only for existing residential buildings connected to both city water and sewer systems. 6, rebate program limited to only the completed and approved applications of the toilets purchased on or after January 1st, 2015. 7, proof of the installation of a new toilet and proper disposal of the old toilet must be submitted. That funding for the rebate program in the amount of $5,000 be provided from Council Contingency Fund. I'll move that.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Patterson? Okay. Any comments on the motion? Councillor Patterson.
Just one. You've limited it to just residents. Any particular reason? Since we have a lot of businesses that have washrooms?
In the past, it's always been to residents, so that's why.
Would you consider a friendly amendment? To include businesses?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
For
the rebate and to encourage.
We've never done it for businesses. We've always done it just for residents. I don't think that. Anyway,
that's
I'll
why
leave it up
I've
to
asked for a friendly amendment.
Okay. Discussion on the amendment. Councillor Greer?
I don't disagree strongly about the commercial use, but I think the idea of giving a subsidy is for the people who can't afford it. And as I think I've talked to several of the councillors, and it's been my experience that I know of 5 people that did it last time, and they all had lots of money. So I don't know whether the people that are on low income, whether they can afford the construction of installing the toilets, or whether they even know about it. So I hate subsidies, and for that reason I wouldn't support it.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. It's not about the money, it's about encouraging people to use less water. So I don't think it matters whether they have money or they don't have money, so long as they use less water.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you. Yes, although I agree with Councillor Greer that it does tend to be people who perhaps can already afford this who are taking advantage of it, but there is a bigger saving for this community as a whole in that overall we will be using less water. I also think it brings such a program highlights the water conservation efforts as well, and so it serves an educational piece. It puts it before people's minds, and so I will support the motion.
Okay. Anybody else? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That's carried. Anything else under new business? Councillor Powell. Councillor Beale. Anything under new business? Councillor Oates?
Yes, just a couple items. Just for clarification, the tax bylaw on that, we have to do one more meeting now in order to conclude that. Okay, it's my understanding the scheduling might be a bit of an issue, so I move that a special council meeting be held in the forum at the Civic and Technology Centre, 100 Jensen Avenue East, Parksville, BC, on Monday, April 27th, 2015 at 6 p.m. for the purposes of finalizing the budget deliberations.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Patterson. Okay. Any discussion on the motion?
Next Monday, 6 o'clock.
It won't be a very long meeting. Pardon me? You can't make it? What night could you make it next week? Because Councillor Powell is going away on holidays. All of next week? Friday is what? Friday is the...
Can't do it that quick. Can we do it that quick?
You're gone on the 1st of May?
Can we do it this Friday?
Would you mind? You sure you don't mind? All right. Yes, Councillor Oates.
The spirit of the motion was to allow maximum participation in council. So if they wanted to make a friendly amendment that would allow Councillor Salter's presence later this week, I understand Friday might be an option. I'd be very amenable to something like that.
Can we do that, Mrs. Weeks? Would Friday of this week suit you? Oh, say, do you want to change that date then?
Am I going to be here?
Friday's the 24th.
Works for me. You're going to be here? Is everybody going to be here Friday? I'm fine with changing it to Friday. Yeah.
Second, who's the seconder? Councillor Patterson. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? So it'll be Friday, April 24th at 6 p.m. in this chamber.
I'm still not done.
Councillor Oates.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Last weekend I had the privilege of attending the AVICC up in Courtenay along with the rest of council. It was a very enjoyable experience. I really enjoyed the opening session in the morning there, and the guy from the Aboriginal First Nations came and talked about reconciliation. That was he was amazing, actually. He spoke for 3.5 hours, never used any notes, and he was just so engaging, and he tackled the issue from a different perspective that was very inclusive, and I felt very comfortable in the room, and I wish the rest of council would have had the opportunity to see that. I was also interested, I guess, in the resolution process that went through there, or how the resolutions are dealt with. but there was one particular resolution that came up on the last day there that was emergency resolution at the district of Seashelt. And I'd like to make the motion and then speak to the resolution afterwards. I'd like to move that the City of Parksville write a letter to the provincial government or to the Premier reiterating that the position of AVICC on oil spill preparedness is also the position of the City of Parksville, and encourage them to follow through on the AVICC resolution. If I had a seconder, I can tell you what that resolution is.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Patterson.
Okay, so the resolution that was passed, I believe unanimously in the room, was whereas the oil spill event of April 8th, 2015 in New English Bay and the Salish Sea demonstrated a clear lack of capacity to respond to oil spill events in British Columbia, and whereas the long-term viability and economies of BC coastal communities are dependent in part upon the protection and preservation of the local marine environment, therefore, be it resolved that the AVICC requests the Province of British Columbia order an independent audit of the current state of oil preparedness in BC. I'd like the support of Council in us writing a letter to the government saying that we support this position. We reiterate that we strongly support this position. I think that what happened over in English Bay there a week and a half ago is a clear indication that we need to be prepared and know what our capabilities are. And I think if that's any indication of what our capabilities are in the event of a major spill, we have an awful lot of work to do. And should the Salish Sea there be subjected to a major oil spill, and remember what happened in English Bay was just a fuel from that tanker as opposed to a tanker full of fuel. If we had a tanker that had a spill here and our beach became contaminated, we would have major long-term problems here in the City of Parksville. So I would encourage the rest of Council to support this motion.
Okay, any comments on the motion? All those in favor? Thank you. That carries unanimously. Any further new business? Okay. I have some new business I'd like to announce, and first of all, I'll dedicate this to Councillor Salter. The Englishman River Water Service public engagement opportunities. Plans are now well underway for public engagement opportunities for the Englishman River Water Service project. Public information sessions will be held on Tuesday, May the 19th, from 3 to 7 p.m. at the Parksville Community and Conference Center, open to all of the public. On Wednesday, May 20th at 7 p.m., the open house will be at News Place. The Council will be hosting a Town Hall meeting on Thursday, May the 28th, 7 p.m. at Knox United Church. The Town Hall meeting will provide an opportunity for community members to offer input and voice their opinions about the water project. Information will soon be posted on the City's website, as well as information will be provided in advance in the May 12th and May 14th editions of the Parksville-Qualicum Beach News. And this is the beginning. There'll be others. We just don't know the dates.
Give us the times again. 17.
The public information session will be on Tuesday, May the 19th, from 3 to 7 p.m. at the Parksville Community and Conference Center, and on Wednesday, May the 20th, at 7 p.m. at the News Place. The Council will host a Town Hall meeting on Thursday, May the 28th, at 7 p.m. at Knox United Church. The Town Hall meeting will provide an opportunity for community members to offer input and voice their opinions about the water project. So, this is the beginning.
Is that our motion or what?
No, that's going to happen. That's on. Pardon me?
I'm interested that you can tell us that we have 3 meetings, which is grand, and yet when I put a motion forward that we have meetings, it's defeated. So this is really interesting to me, that it's okay for you to give us these meetings, which I would say I'm sure the community will love to see, and yet to carry on with the meetings, that's not going to happen because it's been defeated. So what it's looking like to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Your Worship, but if you can tell us that we have the meeting, then we get to have it. Is that how this is going to be? Because if that is, I need to know.
If you recall, when you were making your motion, I proposed at that time that I did have an announcement to make, and perhaps in retrospect, maybe I should have made my announcement first. But I normally, as mayor, let everybody else go first with their new business.
My question is this. There was no motion here. You announced that we would have these meetings, and I'm saying that's good. But why then was a motion to have meetings every 2 months defeated? I mean, we don't need to do that, because you can just say that we're going to have them, and then we'll have them.
Yeah, well, I repeat, I asked you to allow me to make that statement earlier, and you decided to make.
If I may, Your Worship.
Yes.
On April the 8th, Resolution 15-102 was carried that it was made and it was carried by Council that a town hall meeting regarding the proposed Englishman River Water Service Treatment Plant, originally scheduled to occur no later than April the 15th by Resolution 15009 from the January 19th meeting, that Council meeting rescheduled to occur no later than May the 31st.
The other item I wanted to bring up was that our friends at Arrowsmith Lodge in Coakley Manor are going to be hosting a gala garden event. Yes.
One of the meetings you suggest is on the May the 20th. Now that is that Monday, the 18th, is a holiday. So does that mean then we have a regular council meeting on the 20th?
Yes, we do. Yeah, but the one on May 20th is at Nanoose Place. That's for the residents of Nanoose.
Okay.
I mean, the residents of Parksville are welcome to go, but it's mainly scheduled for the residents of Nanoose.
Oh, now I understand. These meetings that you're talking about are ones that the Englishman River Water System are putting on, not the City of Parksville. That's the difference.
You can go. Anybody can go.
Sorry, I thought these were town hall meetings.
The town hall meeting will be on the 28th.
So it's just the one town hall?
Yeah. For now. The Arrowsmith Lodge and Coakley Manor are going to be holding a gala garden event on Friday, May the 29th. We're all invited to attend. It's from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., and this is a fundraiser, so keep that in your notes. And finally, in the matter of what was discussed tonight, I just wanted to remind everybody at the AVICC meeting, we did pass a resolution, and I'll read it. Therefore, be it resolved that the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities request that the Province of British Columbia increase the funding to health organizations to provide additional community health resources and work with policing bodies to implement integrated response plans for mental health crisis. So, any other items?
So if we're having that if the ERWS is meeting on the 20th, and we're also having a meeting here on the 20th, will you and Councillor Powell not be in attendance here?
No, we'll be here. This is a meeting for staff to answer any questions from the public. We don't have to be there. We'll be here on the night before for the open house in Parksville for the Parksville residents. Okay. Final time, the open house at the Parksville Community and Conference Center is on Tuesday, May the 19th from 3 to 7.
Got it.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay. Can I call for an adjournment? It's been a long night. Councillor Beal, Councillor Greer, the meeting is adjourned.
We're just a little slow here, that's all.
Yeah, I can gather that. I don't know how clear I could have made it, but anyway, I'll try.
Oh, dear. No, that was good. You did a good job there, Mayor.